Thank you very much, everybody, for coming out tonight. It's wonderful to be with such esteemed colleagues in this issue. You know, before I came over here, someone said to me, well, they were hearing who the panelists were, and they said, well, who's the pro-torture person to balance it? And, you know, and I laughed too, but then I realized, you know, this is where we are as a country now. Torture is no longer 100% taboo. It's a subject you can actually debate in polite society and in places like Washington. And so I have to say, as a writer, most writers are very proud when they turn out a book. I think it's a tremendous shame that I had to write this book. It is astounding that there could be a book that had to be written about torture in a country that is founded on the principles of the Enlightenment and on the notion that all people are given inalienable rights by their creator, not just American people, but all people. So it's been a shame to have to tell this story. At the same time, people have often asked me, you know, how can you stand it? You know, don't you have nightmares and things like that? The dirty secret as a writer, at least for me, is that this has been completely obsessively fascinating to write about. And it's been an unfolding mystery for me to figure out how this country became a country that embraced torture in dark rooms, and to try to piece the pieces of the puzzle together was so amazing. It made me enamored of a quote from Hannah Arendt, in which she described the importance of writers in facing totalitarian states, which I'm glad to say, I don't think in yet, but where she talked about that anti-democratic countries try to erase history, and the job of the writer is to capture that history and tell it, and go down those dark holes into the dark side and tell about the dark, but also, and very importantly, to write the stories of the small and the big courageous acts of people who stood up and said, we're better than that along the way, because it's those stories that you really want to pass on to the next generation. And as she put it, you can't expect everybody to do the right thing, but if there are a few people who do the right thing, we're still a civilization. And we need to pass on those stories. So in my book and in writing about this, I've tried very hard to tell the stories of the people whose conscience came into a crisis over this program, and through them to have readers feel just how much was at stake here, that this wasn't just about Republicans versus Democrats or some kind of silly political argument. This is a debate that I think goes to the soul of our country and what kind of civilization we are. And some of the people, I'm glad to say, who helped me tell that story because they stood up so courageously and admirably were Scott Horton and Elisa Massimino. So they're right here tonight, and I'm very glad to be with them. Lisa talked about the corruption of language. I think this has been one of the real difficulties in telling this story. While I was having a kind of a probably immorally interesting time putting this story together, the challenge was not just getting the story, but making readers care. And part of the reason was when you corrupt the language, it kind of, it corrupts more than just how you tell the story, it corrupts thought, really. And so when our government was telling us we don't torture, when in fact they were, it meant that the country never had an honest debate where we were asked, do you want to torture? Because people were never really given a chance to think about this in a candid and honest way. And they took that away from the country when they took the language away from the country. So as a writer and trying to get people to care, the challenge has been to restore the shock value of what an awful thing this was. And in thinking about that, I think that it was important not to do the obvious thing. What one would think you would do then would be to sort of jump up and down and be emotional and preach. And in fact, I think that would have been exactly the wrong thing to do. I think in order to reach readers, it was very important to be nonpartisan, not preachy, but in fact to find credible voices who were, if anything, politically unexpected. which is why when I write about torture, I often quote the FBI saying, we can't do this or we're going to lose our soul. I turn to many military figures who you think of as being conservative and very sort of patriotic in a kind of a, obvious way. And when they speak out, I think I can get to readers beyond the sort of little amen chorus. And one of the things that Human Rights First has done is pulled together a tremendous group of retired generals and admirals and others who have spoken out, and they have tremendous credibility. The other thing that's been very hard about getting people to care is that the kind of torture program that this was is something called no-touch torture, which means it's torture that doesn't create blood. It's not something that's like pulling people's fingernails out. It's not like 24 and Jack Bauer, which is what you think traditionally of torture. So it's been a leap of imagination. It requires people to really think about what it means to be kept awake for days and days on end, or to be put in a stressed position. Things that don't sound so awful, being kept in isolation. It's been very hard as a writer to convey what this did to people. And the best way I could do it was finally to get access to one or two people who've gone through this program and give their experience some kind of voice. But the government has kept us as journalists away from most of these people. Well, the one or two that I've met, Khalid al-Masri, who was renditioned, it had tremendous emotional impact on me to see him. He was the first person I'd seen who'd been renditioned. And to see, as I interviewed him, I just was trying to get a few details about his experience. He started to cry. And to see somebody sitting over a cup of coffee with you, a car salesman from Germany, just falling apart, remembering what he went through, I felt, I need to somehow get this across to people so they understand these aren't others. These, as he said, they really are just like us. And I think that, with different names and different races and different religions, it's been very hard to convey that. But I do actually feel somewhat optimistic that we're turning a corner. Both of the nominees in the last presidential race were, I think, truly anti-torture, as opposed to the people in the government saying we don't torture now. And I think it's an incredible privilege to be a writer and to be part of that change.
Thank you, Jane.